Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I want to welcome you to the November GCLS Virtual Series event, Creating Characters for Our Community. This panel is sponsored by Bella Books, and I'm going to play a video sponsorship for you. Thanks again to Bella Books for sponsoring this panel. To make this session as interactive as possible, please use the Q&A box during the entire session. Feel free to start asking questions right away. You are also welcome to chat, but remember to change the to option to everyone. Let's get started. We hope that you enjoy this event. I'd like to turn over the session to our moderator, Rachel Gold.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the panel. I'm about to introduce the panelists. I'm Rachel Gold. I've written a number of queer and trans young adult novels, and I'm delighted to be here today to help everyone talk about their writing process and creating characters. If you all want to turn on your videos, panelists, I will begin introducing you. First of all, Susan Meagher. Susan is currently working on her 47th novel and is nowhere near tired of the whole thing. Next, we have Jay, the author of 22 sapphic romance novels. She lives in the sunniest city in Germany, near the French and Swiss borders. The writing bug bit her at the age of 11. She used to work as a psychologist, but gave up her day job in 2013 to become a full-time writer and part-time editor. As far as she's concerned, it's the best job in the world. When she's not writing, she's an avid reader, indulges her ice cream and stationery addictions, and watches way too many TV shows. I find that hard to believe. All right, Yolanda Wallace. Yolanda Wallace's love of travel and adventure has helped her pen numerous globe-spanning novels, including the Lambda Award-winning Month of Sundays and Tailor Made. Her short stories have appeared in multiple anthologies, including Romantic Interludes 2, Secrets, and Women of the Dark Streets. She and her wife live in Savannah, Georgia. Melissa Brayden is is a multi-award winning romance author with 12 novels published with Bold Strokes Books. She is currently hard at work on her 13th and embracing the full-time writer's life in San Antonio, Texas. Melissa is married and working really hard at remembering to do the dishes. For personal enjoyment, she spends time with her Jack Russell. Coffee is her very best friend. And last but hardly least, Karin Kallmaker, who has always written about women who love women and isn't likely to change. Her addiction to Tim Tams, coffee, and Tatoes won't likely change either. Her dozens of novels include Because I Said So, Painted Moon, and Captain of Industry. She has won multiple Goldie and Lambda Literary Awards over her 30-year career and is a GCLS trailblazer. Her new novel is simply the best. That's the title, but it may also be an accurate description of the novel. All right, welcome everyone. We encourage questions. It's great if you could get them in the Q&A box. I will also try to scan the chat in case you accidentally ask a question there. In the meantime, I'm going to get us started with a lightning round. So for the warm-up question, which of your characters is most like you? Does someone want to volunteer, or shall I call on you as if we're in class?
I'll go first.
Okay, great.
Oh, I'll try to put some of my DNA in all of my characters. So each one is a little bit like me, but the one that's most like me is probably going to be Rashida from Date with Destiny, because she works in a bank in the South, and so do I. That's why I wrote the book under a pen name. So my bank that I work for wouldn't think I was writing about the bank that I work for. The one that's least like me is probably the one I'm working on right now, because one of the main characters is an ultramarathoner, and I do not do anything physical. So I'm a complete couch potato. So that is a stretch for me, for sure.
Excellent. Yes, Yolanda has added on our bonus round question, which is character who's least like you. So most like you, least like you. Who's up next?
I can jump in. Wait, I have to say something before I get started. Rachel, is it true that it's your birthday today?
It is actually my birthday, yes. And I want to thank the GCLS and Bella Books for sponsoring my birthday party.
Yeah, pretty much. We are gathered here in celebration of you. So happy birthday from all.
I figured I couldn't put together a better group of people on my own. So thank you all. Thank you all for being here for this. Yes.
Well, happy birthday. Yeah, and as your birthday wish, we shall answer your questions. And I think the last one posed was about a character that we're most like. And I was thinking about this, and I think it goes back a little bit to Kiss the Girl, the book, the character of Brooklyn Campbell. And I choose her because she has a lot of the same quirks that I do. She drives a Beetle, and I drove many different Beetles over the course of 18 years. And she had gotten 4 warnings, pulled over for speeding tickets, and was given warnings instead of tickets. And that was me. I had multiple warnings as well. I'm much better now, I promise. She's also very unorganized. She has like a million different hairbrushes, and she doesn't need all of them. And so I identify with lots of her quirks.
All right, for speed, I'm going to start calling on people. Susan, go for it.
I am not a lot like any of my characters, mostly because I write to live through other people of my own invention and have other lives and have other families of origin. So yeah, none of that's me. But there's a little bit of me in everybody, in every character, because I think that's true for every writer. And least like me is Bailey Jones from, what's the name of that book? Inside Out. My assistant, because she is a nerd and a geek, and she loves sci-fi and all that, and I do not.
All right, fantastic. How about Karin and then Jay?
Oh, so you're calling on us now. Yay. Every time I think about this, I change my answer. And I think that the truest thing is to say the most recent character I've written, because my characters are threads around the world and a thread of myself, and I make a braid, and that's the character. So my most recent one, Alice Cabot, is a little depressed, very anxious about the world, angry about things happening in the world, and trying to find a way to love herself and somebody else anyway, in spite of all of that. And that feels a lot like me. She also has an inner snark that at the moment she can't keep inside. Other people are hearing it, but I have an inner snark monster, and it's all the time. So whenever that shows up in a character, that's me. I am literally thinking very inappropriate things right now.
I know we want to hear more about that, but Jay, go ahead. What character is most like you, and bonus least like you?
I'm going to cheat because I feel like I'm more of a mix of different characters. I'm a little bit like Denny from Wrong Number, Right Woman, because I'm introverted and more on the shy side. Like Anya from Paper Love, I'm a stationary geek. And like Dawn from Conflict of Interest, I have the psychology background, and I think I have a pretty big heart for people. And least like me, I'm not going to cheat with that one. I would say Dee from Under Falling Star, because she's a total ice queen and her leadership style is knocking heads together, and I'm not like that.
Excellent. Okay, moving into the serious questions, though I will break out another lightning round if we need one. Tell us about a character of yours that was particularly challenging to create, and about the research that you did for that character. This time I'm calling on people. So Melissa, can I start with you?
Yeah. This was a question that I gave a lot of thought to. I think anytime you write a character who is outside of your own experience, you have to hit the pause button to a certain extent and really take time and think and put in the extra care and thought. And I remember the first time I wrote a character outside of my own race was not only a daunting thing to do, but a challenging thing to do as well. And I knew going in, and the character was African-American, and I knew going in that I was not going to be writing about the experience of being a Black woman. That's not something that I'm qualified to write about or touch on to any extent. But at the same time, it was important to me that all of my main characters were not white, because that is not the world that I want to live in. I don't think it's representational of our society as a whole. but in research, I did a lot of reading, I did a lot of pausing, I did a lot of reflecting, and the use of sensitivity readers, I think, is key. And I remember sending that first chapter off. And the book was the last book in the Seven Shores series. And I remember sending that excerpt of that chapter off for the first time and being so nervous. And the encouragement that I received back, helped a great deal. And I'm sure there were missteps along the way. I wouldn't presume otherwise, but I think in the midst of that, I'm still glad that I did it, because one of the things that fueled me was I received an email from an African-American reader who told me very complimentary things and said, "You are my favorite author, but I never see myself in your books. Am I never going to be able to see myself in my favorite author's books? I'm just checking in." It was the sweetest email, but it really got me thinking, and it really stuck with me. And it really was that catalyst to make me get over my fear and know that I might make mistakes, but that it's important for me to step out from what I know and write characters to the best of my ability. So I think that's what I go with. And since then, I've continued. I think my most recent release was a similar situation. I wrote a biracial character, and it required some extra work, and it's important work.
Thanks. Jay, can I go to you next? A challenging character in the research you did.
Yeah. I like to challenge myself for pretty much every book, so I could name a lot of different ones, but I'm not going to cheat this time. I think the one where it was most important to really take on a challenge was when I created Holly from Perfect Rhythm. Holly is an asexual woman, which for her means that while she is romantically attracted to women and she falls in love within the book, she doesn't experience sexual attraction. And at the time when I first started doing research for Perfect Rhythm, which was over the course of 3 years, actually, there was not a single sapphic romance out there with a asexual character. And so I felt it's very important to write that book. But on the other hand, it felt like there was a huge pressure on me, because it was the only one out there at the time, to get it right and to write a believable asexual character who asexual people felt like was a good representation of what it's like to be asexual. And that's a pretty impossible task, because everyone experiences being asexual differently, which also leads me to what I did for my research, because while I read a lot about asexuality, like everything out there about asexuality, from nonfiction, academic research, blogs, websites, forum, YouTube videos, you name it. The most important piece of my research was actually talking to asexual people and to get an idea of how broad that spectrum is and how different people experience their sexual orientation. That was so much research. I could fill a 500-page book with all of that research, but it felt important to take that on, even if it took 3 years.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm going to pause for a second to tell the audience it's great. I see questions coming in. We're going to start answering some of those live in a few minutes when we're through this question. So please keep asking and we will get to those. Yolanda, do you want to go next?
Sure. For me, the most challenging character I know was actually in my second book, Rumspringa. The idea for the book came to me right away, which is about an Amish girl who's going through her Rumspringa, which is her coming of age. So she can take as long as she needs to decide where she wants to be, whether in the real world or in the church. So the idea came to me right away, like I said, but the world building took a while, because obviously I'm not Amish. I don't live in Pennsylvania or in those communities. So I had to make sure I did the research to get that part right. So I wasn't just making a caricature, I was making a character and a real person. So that took a while. I did Google everything I could find. I did lots of research, read lots of books and magazines. And then for a while, all you saw on TV were Amish romance novels and Amish TV movies about it. So I could actually use some of those experiences in that book too. But it's a lot of fun to write, but it's also challenging as well. But I'm proud of the end result.
Excellent, thanks. How about Karin and then Susan?
This is also something where every time I think about it, I pick something different. But I think I'll go with the character where I had to do the most research, and that was a character with chronic anxiety. That I had to move away from fictional representation of people with anxiety, because most of those are not based on on really rigorous examination of what that means. And I think it's somewhat like you know, an ACE character that there was, I know that Jay had a lot of pressure for that character to, quote, be cured. And it's not something that's broken. And somebody with anxiety in a chronic way, there is no cure. They simply cope or find coping mechanisms, and people around them have to be adaptive and understand where they're coming from. And I didn't have that perspective when I first decided to write the character. I wanted to write a character that was neurodivergent, that connected with people in a different way, could be derailed by the most seemingly innocent of things, and to show how the two characters could come to trust each other in spite of these unusual events that could happen and derail take conversations off the track or keep conversations from happening. So I did a lot of reading. I read blogs and I read Tumblr posts by people who are neurodivergent in different ways, as well as chronic anxiety, to get a better perspective of something, because it's not something I have experience with. And that was one of the leads in My Lady Lipstick, Paris.
All right, Susan, go ahead.
I'm up. I think I spent the most time, I definitely spent the most time working on a character named Chiara, who's a winemaker in Tuscany. And she was a native Italian, so I am not. And I've never made even a single bottle of wine. So that took a lot of time and a lot of research. And I had to hire sensitivity readers. So that was the most work, and trying to be sensitive to a culture that I admire and am fascinated by, but I'm not a part of. I really tried to tread lightly with that while still making her as vibrant as I could.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A about sensitivity readers, which I'm going to read to you so you don't have to worry about this. And I know that this is a question that comes up a lot because writers, you know, they're looking for how to use sensitivity readers, how to use beta readers, how to find them, how to treat them well. So your thoughts on that, including, do you use them for difficult topics like sexual assault, domestic violence, et cetera? That's one of the questions. And then we have a questioner trying to find a specific sensitivity reader, in this case, a Blackfoot Two-Spirit reader. So how do you go about, how, you know, like, what do you use your sensitivity readers for? What topics? And then how do you find someone if you need someone who's very specific? And I'll let you all volunteer on this one.
I use sensitivity readers for everything that I don't have personal experience with. And even if I have personal experience, I usually get someone with a similar background because we all experience things a little different. That might be like, for the setting, I always have a beta reader who lives in the city that I'm writing about to make sure it's authentic. The job that, or any hobbies that play an important role in the book. And for sure, if the character belongs to a minority that I'm not a part of, that I make sure that I have at least 3, if possible, even more. Again, for the same reason, because no one can represent an entire group of people. Where I get it, I have a Facebook group that is a really great resource. Other Facebook groups, Twitter is usually also good for finding sensitivity readers. And one important thing is to always offer them payment if they want it. Not everyone wants it, but if they do want it, it's important to offer them some compensation.
I'll go. I think, you know, everything Jay said, of course, and just echoing that, social media is just a great place to find all sorts of people who are willing to help out. If you don't have someone that you trust and that you know and have at the ready, just saying what you need will sometimes get you a slew of responses. As somebody who's sometimes pressed for time, and maybe it's not even an overarching broad theme that I need the whole novel read, I've actually just sent excerpts off before. Like, I'm concerned about this scene on this particular topic that I feel out of my depth. And so I think that's something to keep in mind too. If you're not able to send off your whole novel and wait, just portions of it can benefit from help. And I think it's important to understand that you do need that help.
Susan,
I would actually love it if GCLS would stress that a little bit more to the membership, that you don't have to be an expert in any topic to offer to help. You know, I needed somebody from Pittsburgh and I had a heck of a time finding somebody. I finally did, but I thought this is going to be easy, but no, it was not. Again, echoing what the others have said, you just have to be careful. You have to be thoughtful. And again, as Melissa said, don't be afraid to just take the snippets that you have and have somebody look at those. And then it's a smaller ask if you do that too. If someone's doing this as a favor to you, the easier you can make it for them, the better.
Karin and Yolanda, can I add a question to your question before you answer it? So in addition to, you know, how you find or use beta and sensitivity readers, you know, some people will do it just for the acknowledgement. Some people will do it for money. Are there other ways that you have attracted sensitivity readers for your work?
I'll jump in as having, I'm really a control freak about my process, and I don't use beta readers or sensitivity readers. I know, and maybe I should, but the first person who sees my completed manuscript is my editor. And when I have doubts about where I'm going, I stop and research, which is why probably it takes me so long to crank out work. I want to become my own sensitivity reader if that's possible or within me, if I can grow enough to do that. And so I try to push that. If I run into things that I think might be going off the rails or not working, I talk that through with someone I think I can trust to bounce that off of. But as far as other people actually reading my work, no, the editor is the first one. And I just, that maybe I'm just too old to get over doing things that way, but that's how I've always done it. And that's how I'm always gonna do it. Yeah.
Everyone with an inner control freak is thanking you right now. Okay, Yolanda, you were gonna talk, go ahead.
Well, I'm like Karin. I don't have my beta reader is my wife. So she's the one who reads my work. And even when she's reading it, I'm sitting there going, what is she thinking about it? What is she thinking about it? So I'm like waiting to see what the reaction is. So she reads it. I read it like a million times before I send it in, and then I send it to the editor. So I'm like Karin, I'm my own sensitivity reader, and Dita actually reads behind me too, but it's just the two of us. And then I send it off to my editor, and then she tells me what she's thinking.
I think you two are making a really great point, though, which is that, you know, it sounds like you talk to people ahead of time. So it's, you know, you can get outside input before scenes are written as well. So that's, you know, and then it sounds like social media and the GCLS community are also places to get that. All right, excellent. Are there other, so kind of another question we have in the Q&A, when you're researching, what resources are the most valuable for you? Just whoever wants to answer this, hop in.
I'm kind of embarrassed to say, but YouTube is full of so much information. No matter what subject you are looking for, you can find some sort of documentary, some sort of day in the life, so, you know, whatever profession that you happen to be researching, somebody has documented what their world is. And so it's a real rabbit hole. It's something that you should be aware of if you're going to ever open the YouTube website, is that you will be there for hours, possibly years, but it is tons of information for you to research.
Yeah, I would start with Google, and Google leads me to YouTube and everything else. But yeah, once you start researching something, you can be there for days. So it's vital to get what you need. Start with that and start writing. Otherwise, you would sit there researching forever. We should start writing anything.
And what Melissa said, YouTube and Google searches. I also like Tumblr because people are very unvarnished, and you have to be careful about what you search for. You can take a bad turn down a street where you can't unsee what you just saw, but people are just really unvarnished, and they don't. They're not polishing in the same way that, say, an Instagram post, people are very polished and great presentation. In Tumblr, they're often they'll vent about what it's like to be in their job with a bad supervisor. And that I read a lot of different things and take strands and then make a braid that's a little bit of everything to avoid co-opting someone's experience. So read broadly, research broadly, get lots of sources is, my best advice.
All right, I'm gonna keep rolling. Oh, Susan, go ahead.
Echoing what Karin said broadly, just keep reading other stuff. I listen to a ton of podcasts of people that I normally wouldn't even follow because I want to hear different people's takes on things. I always try to listen to people who are significantly younger than me because, you know, where else am I going to hear that? I don't hang out with 22-year-old people. So the more you learn, the better it just helps.
Yeah, and I would add, do the research first, research as much as you can on your own before you interview the experts or people who have that experience, because you shouldn't be wasting their time with stuff you could have Googled and then narrow it down and write down a list of questions to ask them, and so that you're not wasting their time or being disrespectful.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you all. Great points. So we have another Q&A question that actually transitions to our next list of questions question. So we have a question from a Black author whose debut work is writing about love between two white characters, and will have future books with Black protagonists, but says, I'm nervous about being seen as a whitewash or Oreo because I centered white women with my debut fiction book. How do you cope with expectations like that? And then this leads into the question, like, when reader reactions have surprised you, like, how do you cope with reader expectations? But does someone want to tackle this specific question first, and then we'll do reader expectations? Yes, Yolanda, go for it.
Well, my first few books actually were white characters, because first of all, that's what most of the market expects. They expect white characters to be in the books. And then once you get comfortable writing any character, you can bring in other ones in there, because my third book had a multiracial character, and then I have the Mason-Dixon books have African-American main characters. So you can write a story as long as you tell a realistic story. So it shouldn't matter what the race of those characters are, as long as they're realistic people.
I'll go ahead. I think it's hard to silence those voices, especially when you're intimidated about what you're writing or what people are going to think or what they're going to respond to. And that's hard. That's a tall order to say, turn off that voice in your head that's fearful. But you have to trust yourself and you have to trust your writing. And the best thing you can do is to tell the best story you possibly can, send it out into the world, and be confident in what you've done. Some people don't listen to the chatter that comes back. I wish I was that person. I do tend to read reviews. I do tend to want to know what people are thinking about what I've done, which can be to my detriment, but I do think I'm somebody with a relatively thick skin. So it's not something that I recommend for everyone. But what Rachel was saying, Rachel, are we moving on to that next question? Is it a compound
yes,
question?
It's a compound question. Yeah.
And we talked about, like, was there a response out there that once you put your work forth surprised you? And my answer to that would be, I mean, I've had lots of them, but one that comes to mind would be when I wrote the book Strawberry Summer. I wrote the character of Courtney Carrington, who, for all intents and purposes, presents with a lot of bisexual traits and kind of fits the profile of what we would define as a bisexual. But she was a character who was not into labels, and she was not comfortable labeling herself. And as somebody who, before becoming a full-time writer, I taught high school theater and was immersed with 14 to 18-year-olds all day. And it was prevalent that they were not grasping onto labels. They didn't want to be held down as they went on their journey and became who they were going to be, and then and maybe morphed and changed and came up with new ideas about what they wanted for themselves as they moved through this world, which I very much admired in them to a certain extent and wanted to provide that representation in this particular book. Cut to the responses, which were a little all over the board. There were some people who were so grateful that, thank you for not labeling this character, for letting her be herself, because that's who I am. And I liked getting to see that in a book. All the way to people who wrote scathing things about Melissa Brayden should be ashamed of herself for not using the word bisexual. She is erasing us. This book is bisexual erasure, which I just never saw that coming. And I had to take a beat with that, because as somebody who is bisexual, I really had to evaluate and decide if I stood by what I wrote. And I do, and I'm happy that I did, but that's something I just didn't see coming. And it can be daunting moving forward to new works with that in the back of your head. What are people going to say? So to that particular question asker, I would say do what you can to remain confident in what you've done. in your work and put it out there and let the rest happen.
If you have to do the second half of the question, the surprising responses. I had two actually. For Run Spring, someone actually said they actually used part of the dialogue in their wedding vows, which I never expected was going to happen. And for TaylorMade, someone said that she hadn't seen a Sapphic character who was practicing religion in one of the books before, and she was happy to see herself represented that way.
Okay, but I'm going to push a little, Yolanda, and say, have you had one that was like negative and surprising, and how did you cope?
Actually, yes. For The War Within, there's two main characters. One is a grandmother going with her granddaughter on vacation, and so half the story is her finding the person she was in love with back when she was in the military, and the other half is the granddaughter. And someone actually wrote in saying that I focused too much on the older characters. She wants to see the young kids. I'm like, well, it's the two main characters. What's the older characters? So I had to just say that, people who are older than 50 or older than 20, they fall in love as well. So I wanted to portray that relationship. So that surprised me a little bit. That they were like, even though it says so on the back of the book that she's half of the book, they don't want to see her in the book.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's an important part of creating characters for our community is, having that confidence, having that resilience when you've created the character. What other stories do we have about reader reactions that surprised you?
I was surprised by a character I wrote who was very much an ice queen, semi-hostile, did not take feedback from people very well, was very dismissive of people. And I thought this was a legit ice queen character. And I was surprised by the number of readers who responded by just simply saying she was a stone cold bitch and they didn't like her. And what I can't separate from that feedback is that this character was also a person of color. And I know we were going to perhaps touch on that later, but I really struggled with how to take that feedback and think I've never gotten this feedback before, and it just happens to be the character who's a person of color, or is there a relationship there, and that I'm also dealing with reader resistance to feeling empathy for a character that's not white, which I think is real. So that was something that caught me by surprise. But as Melissa said, you just have to go ahead and put belief in your work, and that it can speak for itself. An essential lesson I learned from Catherine Forrest eons ago was that a book can only have as much integrity as you can put into it at that moment. And you can't put any more into it than that. So as long as when you step back, mistakes and all, you can say it was the best I could do at that moment, you can at least start from a place of that and move forward and bounce back from the negative feedback. And promise yourself you won't make those mistakes again.
Jay, Susan, go ahead, and then Jay.
I was surprised and really disappointed. This was quite a few years ago. I had two of my more popular characters talk about using a Black man as the sperm donor for their child. And I got more feedback from that than anything else I've ever written. And that's not good because they were all negative. And it was almost funny because people were trying not to mention the fact that the guy was Black. They had all these reasons. Oh, he lives all the way in Los Angeles. I'm like, oh yeah, that's horrible. It was, they were trying not to be, they probably didn't even realize they were being, really racist about this. I think it was disappointing, to say the least, and it made me very unhappy. And I realized I have to just put a lot more Black characters in my books. I just have to not ever let this happen again. If you don't want to see Black people in my books, then just don't read the books, but forget it.
All right, we're definitely coming back to that in our next two questions, but I want Jay to get an opportunity to tell us about surprising reader responses.
First, I'd like to say to the person who asked the question in the chat, as a person of color, you're not obligated to write only about people of color. I mean, that will probably come with later books. And also, I assume that you will have supporting characters who are people of color. It's not just the main characters. Just as I, as a German person, I'm not under any obligation to write only about German people. I'm not writing memoirs, I'm writing novels. And all of us are, if we only wrote about people who are exactly like us in any way, wow, that would get boring really fast. So I think as long as we are willing to put in the work, it's perfectly fine to write outside of our own experience, as long as we are doing it in a respectful way, using sensitivity readers and not taking up spaces from any other authors who actually belong to that group. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say to that. When it comes to surprising reactions, again, I think the most surprising reactions were for Perfect Rhythm. And most of them were a lot more positive than I had feared. I thought, I don't know if all of my readers are really ready for a romance with an asexual main character. Will they make any assumptions like, oh, there's not going to be a sex scene because the character is asexual? Yeah, well, there actually is a sex scene. It's just maybe a little different than people are used to. But I got a lot of really touching and mind-blowing responses from people who read the book and then reached out to me to tell me that this was the first time in their lives that they saw themselves reflected in a book, and the first time they came across the term asexuality, and they didn't have a word for their own experience. So they made a lot of assumptions about themselves, a lot of harmful assumptions, like being broken and having to fix themselves through a lot of unhealthy experiences. And so being able to give them that word and to give them a puzzle piece for their own identity was so amazing and humbling. And so I'm really, really glad that I wrote that book.
That's wonderful. So I'm going to skip ahead to our question about reader biases, including, implicit reader bias. So, we love our readers, and we've been with this audience now for half an hour. So I think we can pull the curtain back and start talking about your secret techniques. So my question around reader bias, is how are you dealing with reader resistance? We have readers who have implicit racism, transphobia, biphobia, ableism, and you all love doing a variety of characters. How are you bringing these characters forward in a way to kind of unpack reader resistance or bias, to say it in a simple way?
Well, I think Susan really hit on the explanation of what I'm trying to do, which is if you do it a lot, every single character you create is carrying less weight on their shoulders in representing both you as a writer and representing the worlds that you build. And that the more representation there is, the safer everyone is to be in our stories as well as in real life. So my chief way of dealing with it is to intend to do it more so that readers are not singling in on a single character and can't get past that. That if the world I present is the world that we live in, hopefully the way that romance gets past people's personal firewalls will work its magic, and they'll come into a world that is like the world we live in and focus less on diverse characters and just accept them as being in the story, and the way we accept people with different colored hair. That would be an ideal world. We're a long way from there, but that's I think really Susan nailed it.
Well, you can't address these issues until you start a conversation. And each time you write a book with a different character in it, it's part of the conversation. So if you make a character that's relatable, it doesn't matter what the character is, someone actually finds a part of them in it. They may not be like them in any way, but at least if one part of the personality is like them, they relate to them, even if nothing else is what they're used to. So as long as you keep the conversation going, you can address those biases without having the back and forth like that.
I think when addressing bias, it has to be my job to, even though I'm somebody who takes in the information and I can continue to do that, but I have to separate that from letting it influence me. And that's something that's ongoing, and that's something that I'm continuing to work on, because I don't want those biases to enter into my brain when I'm telling a story and I'm trying to bring unique and characters that are familiar and unfamiliar into the world of my readers. And so I have to continue to fight the fight to separate the two, and I will continue to do that.
Jay, go ahead.
There will always be a few readers who we won't be able to reach when we write about diverse characters and who are diverse in a lot of different ways. I've recently come across a forum where readers want other readers away from my books because Jay's writing is too queer. And that was like an emotional punch because you encounter stuff like that from the straight world, being too queer, and not from fellow LGBTQ people. But that's actually a very vocal minority, but it is a minority. And most readers are reading fiction to step into someone else's shoes. They want new experiences, and they are very willing to have new experiences through books. And so I think the thing is that if we build a reputation for doing it well and for creating three-dimensional people who are more than just this one thing. Yes, this character is Black, or yes, this character is asexual or has an anxiety disorder, but it's not all they are. They have a lot of different traits. And even if readers can't identify with that one thing, they can identify with other things that make the character who they are.
Susan, do you want to weigh in on this, or shall I bring the next question?
I can give you a few words. I was just thinking about Jay's book about the ace character. It's so easy for people to look at an individual book like that and say, I'm asexual and that's not my experience. So, if someone who felt that way wrote to you, you could take that very seriously. Oh, I got this wrong. But in almost no cases is that true. You got that person's experience wrong, but that is not in any way universal. And if there had been, 1,500 books about asexual characters, yours wouldn't be the one that has to match everybody's experience. So as we've been saying, throughout, we have to do more. Because with more characters, there are more opportunities for people to actually resonate with those characters. And just as an aside, if you're a writer, you don't have to read all the stuff that's written about you.
But I think it's a great point Susan just made.
You don't have to do it.
There's no right way to human.
There's no right way.
There's no right way to human. And for someone to say, you didn't do that right, human. You didn't follow exactly the way I human. It's just not possible. Everybody's different.
I think that's especially valuable advice for writers who are starting out for first book or two. It's okay to press pause on the reviews and wait a little while. Okay, I'm going to toss in a lightning round question, if I may, because I think that we all skipped over something very important, which is that you all write rip-roaring great romance novels where characters fall in love and surprise us and surprise themselves. So here's my question. Give us just one bottle of your secret hot sauce for making two or more characters fall in love in a book.
Chemistry. They have to have chemistry.
Well, but how do you make chemistry? Can you boil it down a little bit for us?
So I used to do a slow burn, but in one of my books, actually the first chapter, they're in bed already. So it just depends on the characters. I know in 24/7, they meet in a bar doing a layover for a plane flight, and they have this wonderful chemistry. And so the rest of the book is about them getting over, we already slept together, but do we actually like each other? So the falling in love comes afterwards, and everything else the other books usually leads up to the sex. That one actually starts with it. So it just depends on the characters. They lead me wherever they want to go. I just listen and follow.
Excellent. All right, who else?
I would say that showing them build trust between them and showing them open up and becoming more valuable, more vulnerable with each other. And the focus needs to be on showing. I mean, readers want to see this happen, and not just being told that, oh yeah, by the way, to sum it up, that apparently it did happen, but really showing the progression of the natural buildup of the relationship.
I think for me, it's a situation of you have to find the origin of the flame. Where is it coming from? And every couple is going to be a little bit different, which is why each book will be a little bit different. Are these two brought together because their conversation is so good and they can't get enough of talking to each other, which then leads to flirtation, which then leads to sparks, then leads to the bedroom? Or is it sex that's bonding them together initially and the other things are going to come afterwards? Is it food? Is it film? It can be a myriad of things, but there is an origin to where that flame is coming from, which may spread to a million different places. But I think it's important. The secret sauce is, what is that initial flame that bonds them from the get-go? And if we have a sex scene, in chapter 2, then it's sex. But if it's, much later in the book, it's something else. And so you have to find what's unique and play a game of find the flame with that character or set of characters.
I'm literally taking notes for future novels. Karin and Susan, what should I add to my list?
I'm taking notes as well. I wrote down building trust, and it's so hard to put it into words because as I write it, I know it's happening, but how do I know? And I think if I look back on a lot of my books, that spark, that initial connection is something that surprises one person about the other, an expectation that they had that did not get met or was blown out they blew way past whatever the expectation was. They realized that someone they underestimated is a lot smarter than they thought or funnier than they thought. And that creates this pocket, this moment of risk, of being open and going, I didn't know about this person, and now I'm open to taking more information in about that person. And that little, like I called it a firewall earlier, but that little breach of the firewall sets off the chain reaction of exploring trust and interpersonal risk and all of those other things. But in my head, I use the firewall analogy a lot. Who's got outbound and inbound rules about whatever, and who gets past them because they're clever or surprising or talented or just attractive. Funny.
All right, Susan, how about you?
Funny matters. I spend a lot of time working on characters before I start to write, but I've noticed with my last 3 books, and I think I've been doing this all along, my first draft is really quite dry. It's much more dialogue and scene setting. And it's not until I get to my second draft that I know the characters well enough to have the sparks really start to go. And then I put it away for at least 6 months. And when I hit my third, then I'm like, oh, now I really know who these people are. And by the time they start talking to one another, I know how they see each other much better than I did with that first draft. By my 4th draft, which I usually have to do, it just starts clicking. It's just repetition and spending more time with those characters over a period of time.
That sounds uncannily like the process of actually forming a relationship.
It kind of is.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so I'm gonna springboard off another panel or audience question. So the audience question is, it's very hard to find a book on interracial lesbian relationships. Do any of you plan on writing them in the future? So that's part 1. And then part 2 is, what are you working on? What kinds of characters can we see from you? So interracial relationships and then other characters we might see.
I've actually done 3, I think, interracial relationships. Let's see. Lucky Loser was 1. Tailor Made was 1, and then 21 Questions was 1. So I've done 3, and they're easier for me to write because I'm in the interracial relationships. I can just ask my wife, did I get this right? Is this okay? But they are difficult to write because sometimes you get pushback on those. It's like, well, aren't both characters of the same race? But if it's what it feels right at the moment. So you just write. So I don't start about knowing which race the characters are going to be or what the characters are going to do. It comes to me as I'm writing the book. So it just feels like whatever they say they want to be, that's what they end up being.
And do you want to say a couple other things we might see from you in the future? What are you working on?
Right now, I'm working on one. It's going to be about an ultra marathoner who's going to work as a guide for a runner who's losing her sight. She's got to be a sight guide for a runner running a marathon. And my godmother, she is 82. She's run over 100 marathons. So she's my subject matter expert on this.
Fantastic. All right. Other writers, what are we going to see from you? And do you have good recommendations for books with interracial relationships, including your own?
I would say, anyone who is looking for sort of the very first would be Anne Ellen Shockley's Loving Her, which was written in the 70s. That's just a touchstone book to maybe look for an experience, because it was the first of its kind in lesbian literature. I think I'm running through my head, and off the top of my head, I came up with 4 that I've written. Carpool, My Lady Lipstick, Because I Said So, and my latest, Simply the Best. But like Yolanda, I don't decide ahead of time what the character's race or even nationality or their jobs are ahead of time. I'm not going in from that direction. I'm thinking of a situation and then trying to say, okay, so what people would be in that situation. And so of course I'm going to write that again. Because it'll be true to the characters in the situation. And what I'm working on now is the dimmest, vaguest glimmerings of a plot where a woman, as yet undefined, decides to intervene in a toxic relationship for her sister. She's taking care of her sister a lot by getting rid of the toxic influence, and goes to meet the toxic influence and doesn't find the toxic influence toxic. So it's something I'm still playing with.
All right, Melissa, you look like you're ready to go next.
I'm being thoughtful. I've written a few interracial romances, starting with Love Like This. I have Marry Me, which is a book that's coming out in 2 days. It's out early on the Bold Strokes website, but it's officially out in 2 days, where I do have a biracial main character. And I exclusive coming out after that also is interracial. So was that the question? What's coming out next?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
what kind of characters can we look forward to? Yeah, exactly.
Yes, and that's the goal, is to continue to explore all types of characters in the future.
All right, Jay, and then Susan.
I have written a couple of books with an interracial couple. First is Next of Kin, and also Falling Hard. And one has a Black main character and one a Mexican American, and they both started out as supporting characters in Conflict of Interest and in Heart Trouble. And they were such great characters that they demanded their own book. And as for what I'm working on right now, I'm working on a book about a very interesting profession. She's actually a professional cuddler. So she cuddles clients for a living, which is an interesting topic during the pandemic. And she also is neurodivergent in a way that most people haven't heard of. She has aphantasia, which I have too. So that means she has no internal imagery, like no pictures in her mind, no sound in her mind, no taste or smell or anything like that, which most people can't even imagine. And I thought everyone was like that, and only found out like 2 years ago that everyone else has this vast inner world, and I don't have that. So I thought, okay, I think it's time that someone puts that into a book.
I don't currently have plans in my near future for an interracial character, but I do have one in my in the back burner that I'm going to get to. I think it'll be my 4th coming up. Currently, I'm working on a age gap romance, 20 years. Working also on a book about women who were basically married, had a child, and have been apart for 18 years. And my 3rd one is a woman who runs a farm in mid-state New York and a food writer. So busy.
Okay, we have 4 more minutes. I think we can get in 1, maybe 2 lightning rounds. I know it's gone very quickly, stay tuned to GCLS for future amazing panels. But we have the question, pantser, plotter, mix, or both. And we have Karin here who coined the term panty liner for an outliner, a pantser who's an outliner, which is one of my favorite terms. So outliner, pantser, both, or do you have your own term?
I'm a pantser. I start with the title and a basic premise, but everything else comes as it comes.
Pantser.
I'm starting to think Yolanda and I were separated at birth.
20, you are 20.
I'm a plotter.
I'm a plotter too, but I leave space for the story to breathe.
Fantastic. Do you want to do one more lightning question? Let's see what's on our list. How has the pandemic, oh yes, that's a point. People are commenting. It's great. How has the pandemic influenced your writing in like a sentence or so?
Oh, I think the stakes are higher. I think things matter a little bit more in my writing now. Those connections are you're holding on to the people close to you a little bit tighter.
All right, I'm going to call on Susan actually because you tend to answer last, so I'm going to put you in the middle if that's okay.
Sure. Pandemic didn't have a huge effect on me in terms of writing, only for the first few months when I was scared. But once things got a little normalized, yeah, I write at home, I stay at home. So just turn off the TV and start writing.
All right, how about Jay?
It was a little surreal at first, like, no, people don't hug, don't kiss, this is not 6 feet. But after a couple of weeks, my writing became my safe space where it's completely COVID-free. The pandemic doesn't make it into my books because we have enough of that in real life. So,
yeah, I'm very curious to know from readers when they're going to be ready to read a pandemic book. Feel free to answer that in the chat. And then meanwhile, Yolanda and then Karin, do you want to answer how the pandemic influenced your
Initially, I had lost my creative spark to write because I spent so much time on my computer for work. I had to start working remotely. I didn't want to do any more computer work at night, but now I got it back again. I wrote a short story that brought it back to me. And ever since I wrote that short story, I've been writing on novels again. So it took a while to find my groove.
I went through a real crisis of realizing that the world that I believed in, that people would join together and do the right thing and be unselfish and cooperate, was a fantasy. And I had to kind of work through that and find a new way back to looking at the world with a positive outlook, which is, the kind of the way I'm wired. So I had an adjustment period.
I am going to put in a plug here for a whole spate of like lesbian, bi, and queer women and non-binary people utopia novels out of the as a backlash to the pandemic. Also, audience, this is your last chance to tell us in the chat characters you'd love to see because we have an entire minute left and I'm going to start thanking people. But feel free, if there's folks you want to see represented, toss it in the chat. And meanwhile, I would like to thank all of our panelists. You've seen some links in the chat. They all have websites you can go check out, find out more about their books, buy and read their books. You'll have a great time doing it. GCLS has a lot of resources. Thank you everybody for being here. I'm gonna pass it back over to Susie for any ending announcements. And thank you all audience. Thank you for being part of my birthday party. It was great to have you. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Thank you, everyone. This is Susie Carr. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate your support, and we look forward to interacting again next month at our next panel. Rachel, happy birthday. Enjoy your day. Woohoo! Take care, everyone.